Welcome to the FLFDN virtual roundtable for April. Today we're joined by Becky Lane, PhD, Ithaca College Teaching and Learning with Technology, representing IC Immersive. The topic today will be using virtual reality in the classroom. And with that, I give it over to Becky.
Oh, well, thank you, and thanks for having me. And I have a presentation, but I'm really kind of curious as to who you all are and how we can how we should spend this hour together. And so if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and letting me know your experience in immersive tech, that would be really great.
Sure, I'll start. I'm Jeremiah Perryhill. I work as the instructional design manager at RIT. I don't have a lot of experience in immersive tech. I think, like many people, I've just played a little bit with Oculus Rift in 2 episodes, but I'm really curious to hear about what this represents for simulation and other learning experiences in our higher ed context.
Great. Marilyn?
Hi, I'm Marilyn Dispensa. I'm an instructional designer at Ithaca College, and I do work with Becky on the IC Immersive initiative.
Steve?
Steve Widener, Senior Instructional Technologist at New York Chiropractic College. Hello again. I don't personally have a lot of experience with this kind of thing either, but I just found out at Ed Tech Day that apparently we have a faculty member here who's working with it, who I still need to get in touch with if our trimester ever lines up in such a fashion I can.
Good to see you, Steve. Lisa?
Hi, Lisa Brown, University of Rochester. I have 0 experience as well. I'm mostly just interested in hearing about it. Our medical center is looking at getting some equipment, and I thought I would just sort of find out what you guys have and pass on any advice or suggestions. Thanks.
Great. Chris? I think that's everybody. Am I missing anyone?
Lori Wodzinski.
Okay.
And it's possible Chris and Lori don't have active microphones.
Okay. Well, great. So let me just start my presentation here and see if that is going to work for us. All right. Does everybody see that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. So all I can see are my slides. So if you have questions, I hope that you will chime in, or Jeremiah, you'll interrupt me. But
sure.
So this is kind of a variation of the presentation I did at Ed Tech Day. And we'll be talking about VR and the difference between VR and AR and how we're using all of those things in Ithaca College. So, oh, it's not letting me go forward. Sorry, tech difficulties.
Maybe it's worth taking the HD off. I don't know if that's possible.
All right, how's that? Is that, let's see. Oh, there we go. Good?
Yay.
Okay. So we already went through the quick questions, and
Hey, Marilyn, sorry, it's Chris Price. I think I fixed my mic issues. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, sure. Yeah, just really quickly. One of the things I do for SUNY Center for Professional Development is oversee our Innovative Instruction Technology Grant Program, and there's a lot of projects around immersive tech, AR, VR, so that's why I'm here.
Well, great. Great. Well, I'm hoping that this can be a conversation as much as it is a PowerPoint with me talking. So it's nice to meet everybody. So just to briefly go over where we're seeing technology, this immersive technology being used. I mean, we all know gaming, entertainment, education. There's a lot in healthcare. with the virtual surgery, and industry and business is using it quite a bit. Walmart just bought, I don't know how many Oculus Go's for their use in training their employees. Augmented reality is used a lot for mapping of interior spaces, and we're only going to see that increase. And a lot of people are wondering, what's the difference between augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality? And those are really good questions. A lot of realities flying around out there. So this is how I understand these, because I know that especially with things like XR, extended reality, and mixed reality, that people have different takes on it. Augmented reality is basically the overlaying of information through your phone. So it's a mediated experience. You're holding up your phone, and through the camera, using the technology of the phone, you can see an overlay of your environment. If you've played Pokemon Go, it's very much like that. I know Google is working on what you see on your screen. They've got that in beta, where you can hold up the phone and see what's around you, and that's exciting when that comes to the rest of us. Mixed reality or spatial computing is what Magic Leap sort of likes to call their platform, and that is basically an overlay. So you see reality, but you also see it's mapped to your environment. So it's 6 degrees of freedom. It has cameras that knows where you are in space, and it also can use. Someone asked me yesterday, "What's that thing with the big button?" And that's a form of haptic feedback that's coming. It's I don't know if anybody has seen. It's like a pad that has sound waves coming. So if you're in a headset and you have this haptic feedback device, you can actually feel the sound waves. So it'll project a button, and when you hit the air, the magnetic haptic feedback will give it a click. So that's, I think, pretty fascinating. But today we're going to talk mostly about virtual reality, because that's what we're exploring at IC Immersive. We've done a little bit in augmented reality, and I've done some, in my private business. But for education, I think that VR is the lowest hanging fruit, and it's the most immersive, and it's where the content is right now. So that's why we're focusing on virtual reality. We've got everything from the Google Cardboard to the Windows Mixed Reality. We've played with all of them. And I know that we are waiting eagerly for the Quest, the Oculus Quest, to come out, because that's going to be 6 degrees of freedom instead of 3. And does people understand the difference between those two things?
No.
Okay, so in 3 degrees of freedom, if I were sitting here, you can look up, down, side, but I'm situated in this space. 6 degrees of freedom gives me the ability to move within that environment. So you're not just stuck in one place. So that's what's going to be nice about the Quest, which is coming out, supposed to be coming out May 1st at F8, the Facebook conference. They'll probably announce it. That's going to be a standalone headset that is 6 degrees of freedom, that's not tethered to a computer. So if you look at the person up there in the upper right-hand corner, that has a cord that is attached to the computer that's running through the graphics card. So that's kind of a limitation of that 6 degrees of freedom outfit. So not only do you need the expensive headset for, I don't know, $500, you need a pretty robust laptop or desktop to run it. So the ability to get rid of those things is going to be pretty significant for us. So about IC Immersive. So we started this about a year ago, Marilyn, right? They had the idea of what is this immersive space? How can we use it for teaching and learning? And I have been working in this as a creator, and I came into this through film, and I also have academic experience and have done a lot of project management and have worked in e-learning. And So when I had the opportunity to work with Marilyn with Ithaca College, I'm like, well, that's great. So they brought me in. We spec'd out a little lab. We bought a Vive. We bought a Rift. We bought some Go's. We bought the Daydream platform. And we really started looking at what is available on all of those different platforms and how we might start incorporating it into the classroom and really kind of defining what we wanted to do in this thing we're calling IC Immersive. So we've decided that it's kind of a three-prong effort. One is building community. So we're trying to do a lot of outreach. And there we've got a picture of our president, who we had an event at the library, and she came down, was a really good sport, and put on a headset. And we also have some students that come in through their classrooms, and we are trying to do different meetups through, just trying to invite the campus to come. And we're having our first meetup tonight with free pizza. So if you're in the area, stop by. I do a lot of consulting with faculty, and that also involves a lot of outreach. I've done some speaking in classrooms, and we've had instructors actually bring their class into the lab. And we also have drop-in hours where we've decided, okay, we're going to open up all our equipment and have these specific hours and advertise them, and anybody who wants to try them can come, and it's manned by people who understand the equipment and can answer questions and give ideas. But mostly it's an opportunity for anybody who wants to come try it. And the basic goal is for all of this is to get people in headsets. Because what we found is until you put on a headset, and I don't know how many people have just done a little bit or never been in a headset or have different varying experiences, because it really is a big difference between looking at something on your phone through a cardboard and putting on this Rift. It's, the difference is quite significant. But once you put on that headset, we found that, and this is my experience too, is that you really start getting ideas about how significant this technology is and what the potential is for it. And people were like, oh, okay, I don't quite get it. And they put on the headset and they're like, wow, I get it. And here are ways that I want to use it. So that's why we're trying so hard to get people in to try it. We had our Ed Tech Day. I don't know, I understand some of you are at Ed Tech Day. We made a big effort to make the immersive court where people just come in, try an experience. We curated a couple experiences, and it was really successful because there are a lot of people, even college students who you think are pretty tech savvy, who have not really tried VR. So I could talk a little bit about immersion, but that's what makes this technology so powerful, is that we're engaging our most prominent senses, hearing and vision, to give a person an experience. And we also can get haptic feedback. And I don't know if I talked about the sound ones, but that's not out yet. But there are gloves, there are vests you can put on that you've probably seen, but the basic one is the controller. And that is really important for really tricking the brain into making you feel like you're in a different space. And the goal, the ultimate goal in VR is to give you what we call a sense of presence. And that is the idea that you are in a different world, that you occupy, that you are embodying a different space. And we see that when we give people different experiences. I don't know if you've ever been in VR where you've been put in on top of a building, and you look down and you feel genuine fear because your brain is tricked. It evokes these really primal responses because you look down, fear of death is pretty strong, and you're tricked into believing that. I mean, in the back of your mind that you're in a lab, you're not going to fall, but that embodiment really is evocative and can have some pretty profound impact on how you're experiencing it. So let's talk a little bit about, oh, before I go on, anybody have questions on any of this stuff? No? You can still hear me though, right?
Yes.
Great, because all I can see is my screen. It's a little unnerving. So let's talk a little bit about education. So one of the things people ask when they say, well, they come to me for a consult, it's like, when's a good time to use VR? And these are just a few reasons that you might want to consider it, or how VR can be used to either complement your teaching or take the place of other teaching. And these are pretty straightforward. When consider VR if there's things that could be harmful to the users or would allow them to make mistakes. There are this is, I think, Labster, which lets you do a variety of experiments in VR. And one of the things that, if you start exploring this, you'll come across is that the platforms right now, like Google, Oculus, they just don't play that well with each other. Labster is on the Daydream, which is the Oculus, or which is Google's platform, but it's not available on Oculus. So it's one of the things you'll probably run into as you move forward, trying to figure out your how you're going to go through this. Another reason to use VR is if it's too hard or it's impossible. And the great thing about VR is it lets you do things that you would never be able to do. This is a picture from it's called the Blue, which puts you in the middle of an ocean on a ship, and it's 6 degrees of freedom. So you can walk to the edge of the ship, and like you kind of see there at the bottom, and look down, and you see the bottom of the ocean. And then as you're standing there, from the distance, you'll see this big whale come up, and you have this whale encounter. And there's other things you can do. So obviously you can't go scuba diving with your class, but you can take them there in VR. And that goes with other virtual tours too that are widely available, like on Google Expeditions and things like that. This is an example of where VR can teach just as well as the real thing. So you don't have to go out and kill a bunch of frogs. You can dissect something in VR and get an experience that is as educational. Or if you have somebody who's not motivated, VR can be really motivating. Obviously, you can't take people on into outer space, but you can take them there in VR. So it's another example. Here's a really good one, and there are some really interesting programs out there that will demonstrate this. So if you have a visual learner, or if you want to learn by manipulating things, you can do that in VR. And I'll show you. My video will play here. This is a program called Nanome, and it works on nanoscale. So he's working in changing the molecular structure or the structure of these things, and you can do experiments, but you can just interact with things in a different way. And also, if you have someone who's differently abled, you can allow them to experience things that they would not ever be able to do. And VR is really great for that. And a lot of people don't understand that there are a lot of educational VR apps out there. The problem is, right now the VR industry is focused a lot on entertainment. So you have to be really clever on taking these applications and sort of figuring out how you can use them in a classroom. So there are a lot of groups who are studying that. If you go on Facebook, there's like the education in VR groups, and they talk about this a lot. Like, oh, I found this program. It's called Masterworks, but I'm using it in my social studies group in this way. So you kind of have to be clever in that. The educational content, there's a lot of work being done out there, but it's not a priority for the Oculus group to make educational stuff. So they're going to be focused more on entertainment, but it still can be really applicable to the classroom. Anatomy is a really popular one for our students. So this is for our PT and OT students. There are a lot of even free anatomy programs where you can go in and manipulate the body in different ways. You can take muscle groups off and put them back on and look at the nervous system in ways that a textbook just can't really match, because you're in there with it and you have the ability to, you know, pull things apart and interact with them and see how the body works. So anatomy is really great for, I know somebody mentioned that they're in medical school. This would be a great application. I'm going to show you this. This is kind of an interesting video too. This one's about virtual surgery. So it lets you practice things. So you get sort of a muscle memory. So they're doing virtual knee surgery. I guess is to demonstrate that, not that you don't, you probably need a little more training than 2 VR things, but that you can get an experience and get comfortable with it before you go in to do the real thing.
Hey, Becky, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned that the landscape of potential VR apps is pretty wide. I guess I'm curious about the evaluation process. Who evaluates, you know, whether an app is appropriate for education?
Well, for us, we're always looking at there's 2 basic places where you can get experiences. There's the Oculus store and there's the Steam store. Oculus is for the Oculus Rift. Steam, it plays both on the Oculus and the Vive. So we're always looking at what's coming out and what's new. But what we do is, like, for example, if we watch a game, we think about, okay, who might this be great for? Like Tilt Brush, for example. I think I have a video of Tilt Brush, and how might people use that? So we can think of, like, okay, if you've never played Tilt Brush, maybe I'll show the video in a second, but it's basically a painting and drawing thing where you can interact with drawing. So that's good for artists. It's good for people in PT and OT to encourage movement. So we're looking at these different experiences with that in mind. So we kind of have a checklist of who might like this and why. So when people do come in, we can show them things. And I'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about the occupational therapist who came and brought all of her students through our classroom, and how we curated things with her and how she participated in that. So we showed her a bunch of things, and then we decided what would be best for her students. And then afterwards, we had a really nice debrief, and they went in and talked about how they might use this and who might it be helpful for. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. So we're talking a little bit about medicine. So journalism is really big in immersive, and this is mostly 360 video, which I still consider very immersive. A lot of people will say, okay, 360 video is much different than VR, and that's true, because it's 360 video is basically, you know, film in 360. So there's no movement, there's no interaction. It's a very passive experience. It might not even be in 3D. It could be flat. In fact, most of them are, because it's the easiest to work with. But it's still incredibly immersive. It puts you in a place, and it's a great way to foster empathy for your cause. So this is an example of the New York Times was publishing one video every day, one 360 video called the Daily 360. And that was in conjunction with Samsung. I think they did it for a year, and now they're not doing it every day, but they are still publishing 360 videos. And it's low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's easy to do. It's just one step away from a regular video, and the cameras are becoming a lot more reasonably priced. So here's Tilt Brush, and this is a really fascinating program where you can draw and then interact with your drawing. So you draw something and it's in 3D, and you can grab it and move it and be in it. You can draw it around you, and you start feeling a little claustrophobic. I will say that the learning curve is a little higher than what you're seeing. But it's not a hard program to learn, and it's very, very accessible and fun. So here you can use this in art, you can use this in design, you can use, I think there's somebody making fashion with it, animation. You can export some of your drawings as 3D objects. So, and this I think was actually invented by accident, which I think is kind of funny, but it's one of the most popular programs in VR. Virtual tours is something that we've also done. There are a lot of really good programs that you can use for free. For the Google Tour Creator is one of them, and we had a request from the library, who's been a great partner for us. We've done some nice events there, and we've always had people come in. I mean, the students will really kind of gravitate to the library, and they're there anyway. But the library wanted to do some virtual tours. So what we were able to do is we did analysis of the major tour creation software programs that are out there, because they do vary in what you can do and the quality and how you interact with the tour. But we found that the Google Tour Creator is as good as any. And I mean, it's good enough to import your 360 videos. And the library took one of our cameras. Well, actually, we took their pictures for them. But we gave them the photos, and they went in and made their own 360 virtual tours throughout their whole space, which was really great. And we've had a lot more interest from like Residential Life and the physical therapy lab, because the potential students want to come and see. If they can't come to campus, they want to see what the facilities are like. And we found that the tours are a great way to do that.
Is it Google Expeditions where there's like a searchable database of tours like that?
It's different than Expeditions. It's the Tour Creator, but let's see. Yeah, here's Tour Creator.
That's where you would find all different.
Yeah, and it's free.
Catalog.
Yeah, so Google Expeditions is where you can go in and take people on all the virtual tours they have, like of the Taj Mahal and all the international places. I mean, this is a video about that. Let's see, just take a few minutes and see if that.
You could pick anywhere in the world that you'd want to go. Where would you want to go?
I would like to go to the moon.
Thailand, ancient Greece,
India.
To Nigeria, my homeland.
One or maybe all of the 7 wonders of the world. When you explore different places, you have the chance to actually learn something new.
You want to be able to show the kids that there's something outside of your community that you could go to and learn from, and that there's other places you can visit.
All right, so let's do our objective, and we'll talk about the lesson for today.
We're going to take a field trip to Verona, Italy, to see the place where Romeo and Juliet lived.
I'm going to take you on this field trip under the water. Okay, you guys ready? Pick up your devices
and look in your cardboard.
What is that?
I
see a shark.
Whoa!
It allowed us to go somewhere we wouldn't normally be able to go.
Are we in China?
This is the Great Wall of China.
We got to see the place itself, so we could actually understand what she was talking about.
How long would it take to walk the length of the Great Wall of China?
So much more enriching than just showing them a picture or just having them read about it.
This device can actually make us go to places that we've never been before.
It brings the lesson to you.
You have to see it for yourself to believe it.
There's so much other places to see, so you know that it's never going to end.
Let's see. Move forward. Huh. For some reason, it's not letting me move. Oh, there we go. All right. So that's just an example of Google Expeditions. Now, to use Expeditions, you either need to have the cardboard, or they sell kits that you can buy that are basically dummy phones that don't have any kind of cell phone capabilities, but it's not inexpensive. I think that it runs about $300 a unit. So it's one thing to say, well, it's cardboard is $12, but when you have to buy a $300 phone, it kind of, it's not that inexpensive. But if you can find like donations of older phones, then it becomes a lot more accessible. So one of the things we're also looking at is how to create VR, because I mean the entry to true VR, like working in a game engine like Unity or Unreal Engine, the learning curve is pretty high, and we don't really have staff at IC that are dedicated to do that. So we've been looking at different types of VR creation software, and it's becoming much easier, like more like drag and drop, where they're doing the hard lifting behind the scenes. So we've looked at Wanda VR as one, and InstaVR as another one, but they're not inexpensive either. They do have educational licenses, but until we have people coming to us and saying, hey, will you make VR for us? We haven't really jumped into this area. And I think it's still kind of a philosophical question we're struggling with too. Like, do we have the staff to do that even if people are asking for it? So I think that is to be determined, but there are software programs like the Wanda and the InstaVR that you can buy that will allow you to create VR without having to know a whole lot of code. Another thing that's interesting that has some really good educational applications is social VR. And I'm interested in that both in the third-party applications that are out there, like InstaVR or VR Chat, and so you can hold classes and meetings in VR, which is really interesting. And yes, you can do it in a Zoom meeting, but if we were all in our headsets, it would be a much more personal experience. I would be able to look at you in your avatar and see if you're raising your hand, and you embody a space that has a much different feel than just a video conference. And InstaVR is free, and there are other places that will allow you to do volumetric capture. That's one of the things one of my personal projects that I want to explore is volumetric capture, and that's setting up a studio where you've got 3D cameras that are capturing someone and projecting that as either a performance or a lecture or an audition, and you can save it as a 3D object. So I think that has a lot of applications in the future, but it's still young. So you can't. If you've seen a 3D capture right now, it's kind of pixelated, it doesn't look that great, but I think that's going to be changing here pretty quickly. So current research in VR, there's some assumptions that we make that it really increases empathy, and a lot of this is just anecdotal, right? So we think it increases empathy, and I think Chris Milk a few years ago called VR the ultimate empathy machine, and since then it's just been repeated over and over and over. You'll hear the word empathy a lot, and studies have shown that yes, it does, and that maybe not so much, and it'll be interesting to see how, as more people become more experienced in this medium, how that may change. Because, you know, it's new to us, and, you know, as people are growing up with this and they're just using it every day, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see how that changes. Same with retention and recall. Different studies show different things for learning as well. So basically, instead of this slide, it should be a giant question mark, because there's so much more we need to study and learn about VR in regards to empathy, retention, and recall and learning. And I think that another thing we should talk about, I don't know if I have a slide for this or not, and I know this came up at EdTech Day, but just sort of the ethical implications of VR when we're talking about empathy and things like that, because we also don't know what it does to our eyes and what it does to our psyches. And an example is I just got I get these blasts from Newegg and these other manufacturers, and it had this media player that it was like 75% off, and it was $200. But what it does is that it projects light onto your retinas, and so it looks like you have a 50-inch screen in front of you. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to buy that. But then I really thought, like, do I really want light projected onto my retinas? Probably not. So I gave it a pass. But it's just an example of, like, we don't really know what this stuff is doing to our brains, and we think it's fine. But I know that Oculus says you know, they don't want kids to use it. Google says use it in moderation. You know, they have it for K-12, but they say use it in short periods of time, right? But we can talk a little bit about why VR is different. You can actually touch things, you can manipulate them, you can create things, you can put things in context, you can rehearse things virtually. It's very active and autonomous. So it has so much potential. I'm super excited about it. But I also wanted to say that there should be some caveats as well. And you know, at IC, we haven't really run into any problems because we haven't had anybody come in and want to use the equipment for 3 hours, whatever. They come in, they use it, and we're really careful about things like hygiene and things like that, which is another consideration, especially if you're going to be working with K-12. So if you're interested in getting started, you need to think about a couple of things. One is what kind of equipment you would like to have. So I mentioned the Google Cardboard that's super cheap, $12, but keep in mind that you're going to need a phone of some sort or several phones, and it's just like any other thing. A newer phone is going to work better than an older phone. Or you can go all the way up to a high-end head-mounted display like the Vive Pro, but then also keep in mind when you have a tethered display, you're going to need a pretty high-end computer to run that. And they're coming down in price, but you're still, you know, looking at least $1,000, $1,200 to run minimally on a laptop. You want to think about what kind of support you have, because things break, things don't work. It's just kind of frustrating when Steam is always updating itself, and it's just it's not, when it works it's great, and most of the time it works great, but when it doesn't, it's a drag, and you want to make sure that you have somebody there who can help you. Think about your software that you want. A lot of this stuff is really reasonable, some of it's even free, but some of the other things like the Wanda VR or the cloud-based services are expensive. And some of the higher end anatomy programs are expensive, but that's just like any other thing. I mean, there are some really great free things out there, but the more advanced programs are going to be more expensive. And I mentioned a little bit about hygiene and things like that. We ask our students to wear these little paper masks, and you know, most of the time people are like, they don't think twice about it. In fact, they appreciate it. And I think as a user, I would appreciate the fact that we are thinking about these things. So, but it's just one more thing to worry about. For resources, if you're interested in more information, I mean, of course, there's EDUCAUSE, there's the International Society for Technology and Education, South by Southwest EDU is really big, Google for Education has a ton of resources, and then there's some Facebook groups. I'm going to give a plug out to IC Immersive, but there's also, if you go on Facebook and search for VR in education, there's a lot of really active groups that are posting every day. And someone also mentioned Games for Change, which I want to look into because I understand that there's a lot of people working in the VR space at that particular conference. It's in New York, coming up here, I think, in the fall. So just before I open it up to questions, we try and think about VR as an engagement tool. It's not a replacement for education. It's a great supplement. And it's like anything else, it's a tool that you want to focus on the content. And when you choose something, make sure that it's relevant to the class, because it doesn't matter how cool it is. If the student doesn't feel like it's worthwhile, then it's not going to fly. Really take the time to debrief and follow up with your students. Or anybody you're working with in VR, because it's always fascinating to me to hear what they've gotten out of it, and their ideas about how some of these experiences could be used or how it made them feel. So take the time to debrief. Another really important thing to consider is to be sensitive to your users' needs. I always ask, or try and always ask, if people have any kind of fears or phobias, or if they have any balance issues, because it's not something they're going to think about. I had someone who put on a headset, and she got really upset because as soon as she put it on, she took it off right away and said she was afraid of being alone, which is something I hadn't even considered. If you're working with different populations, you want to make sure they don't have any balance issues, or don't put somebody who's got phobias into some of these experiences where they've got spiders all around. I mean, there's a lot of like shocking and like scary VR things that we use just for fun, but we always ask, like, do you have a problem with this, or do you want to try it, or do you get motion sick? Because that's another thing. It's gotten a lot better with the refresh rate, and people don't get sick as much, but it still happens, especially if the content developer is not really sensitive to that and they're moving the camera around or you're putting on something that moves a lot. So motion sickness is something that you might want to ask about. And I guess the last thing is to just keep it special, keep the magic about VR. I mean, right now I think it's a really interesting time to be in VR because it's new. We're still kind of learning about it. It's super fun. It's got so much potential that I think we're all seeing, and just to kind of keep that in mind. So with that, I'd really love to learn more about what you have in mind with VR, AR, or mixed reality, or answer any questions that you might have. Great.
This is really cool. I really didn't know anything about most of what you talked about, so I want to thank you.
Sure, yeah.
So one of the questions that I have on the skeptic front, I remember 10 years ago in Second Life. And I remember how Second Life was going to be the next great, here's how everyone connects. And we see what happened to that. And I guess I'm wondering, what is it that makes VR in general different from that, from the socialization connection standpoint? I mean, the general education and the tours and things like that, I totally get that. But I guess I'm wondering, when you were mentioning the video conferencing substitute and all that, what really is it?
I think that's a really good question, because I remember when at Cornell, when one of my projects I was working on was this big Second Life thing where we took law students and gave them avatars, and they practiced interviewing interviewing clients as in this lawsuit. And it was cool. It was fun to make. But what makes VR different is the sense of embodiment that you get, that you do not get from any other kind of experience. And here's an example that I use a lot. So in some of these spaces, you go in, you've got your headset on, and all of a sudden you're in a room, and you could be, they've gotten them set up in all kinds of crazy things, like you could be around a campfire roasting marshmallows, and somebody could hand you a stick with a marshmallow on it, and you have to grab it and take it and put it over the fire. So there's that kind of interaction at that level in an immersive environment that you don't get from any other thing. And one of the things that's just really interesting is that as you're trying to learn how to navigate, it's not that easy to move around. It's a learning curve. So sometimes you will teleport too close to somebody, or someone will teleport too close to you, and all of a sudden you look next to you and there's somebody right in your face, right? And it is so uncomfortable. It feels just like real life, where you're just like, okay, you need to back off, even though you know that you're sitting in your living room or your office or whatever, and they're probably just awkwardly trying to fix, like, oh God, back up. But there's a button you can push on your controller that gives you automatic 3 feet of personal space. So, when they have something like that, because it's such a visceral feeling. It's just like looking down and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to fall. I can't move. I can't move because I'm going to fall. Same thing. It's like this person's too close to me. So it's that feeling of embodiment that makes it so, so different. And until you kind of put on a headset and have those experiences, it doesn't, I could talk about it, but that's what we hear over and over and over again. Until you put on a headset and experience it, you just don't get the magnitude of it. So that's the difference I see. I see a chat, but I don't know if I can bring it up. Oh, you're muted, Steve.
That was just me seeing we could hear you before.
Oh, you didn't hear any of my stuff?
No, I heard your stuff.
Oh, okay.
You were checking to see if we could hear you. And
okay.
I texted and you couldn't see it. So.
Yeah.
Susie, where do you think we are in terms of where this is all at in terms of, I don't know, like how far out are we from like the Ready Player One world, or is that, I know it's fiction, right? But still, are we really far away from that? Are we, I don't know, where are we at? Like maybe looking at the history of the internet or something like that. Are we around 2000? Are we around earlier? I don't know.
I saw the movie once and I read the book, but I'm trying to remember exactly how realistic Ready Player One is. We're nowhere near as graphically, right? So, but the avatars are getting better, and I really see the potential for virtual classrooms in this way. So I would say that certainly within 10 years, technologically, whether or not people will embrace it, I don't know, because we've been kind of on the cusp of VR is the next best thing. You look at the hype cycle, it's been like up, down, and now we're kind of flat because in the entertainment, the headsets haven't sold like they thought. But that's because the barrier of entry has been pretty high. So now we've got these 2 things coming out. I guess the one is the Oculus Quest. So that I think is going to drive a lot of headset sales, because you can have a room scale 6 degrees of freedom environment for $400 and no computer needed. I'm kind of curious to see what the graphics are going to look like. It'll probably look a lot like the Samsung platform that you may have seen, so it's going to look okay. But this is just the first one, So I think that I'm really curious to see what happens with this one, because the other thing is Facebook, who owns Oculus, isn't releasing that until they have a critical mass of games, because we have the headsets, but there was no content. There was not enough good content. And I think they've learned from that mistake, and at least from the entertainment side, are going to launch with 50 games or so on this Quest. So it's going to be really cool to see where this goes.
Other questions?
Just a comment, I guess, to follow up what Steve was asking about with Second Life. I mean, there's still people working in those environments now. They persist and they're very popular. They just don't have the hype that they had, whatever, 15 years ago when they first came out. So, you know, I think that's what we see now with technology adoption. There's the hype, and then like either it sticks or it doesn't, and the stickiness takes a long time. Longer than we're used to, I guess, right?
Yeah, because I think the Second Life called Sansar or something now. I forget.
I don't know if I think it's still called Second Life, but I think, and I know they got sold or something like that, but I think there are other more open source versions of that too, you know, but there are different places that folks are going. Like, I don't know too much.
It's also possible that I'm completely out of date on Second Life and its success, because the only stuff I'm seeing is the folks who are doing the tours of the abandoned Second Life properties. So
that's great.
Yeah, I haven't been on Second Life since, well, a long time. And I don't know, we didn't really talk about AR at all, but that's something that has a lot of potential too. And I think it's a little harder because there's just not, it's a content issue, but they're also like Android, Google and Apple are making their platforms a lot more accessible for people to make their own things. And there are third-party content producers that will allow you to make things too, like Zappar and I forget what the other one's called, but yeah, I think augmented reality, we haven't really done that much in it, but I think that holds a lot of potential as well.
my understanding is that's going to be a big chunk of the new Star Wars park at Disney. Disney is investing a lot of money into AR as something that guests can do while they're waiting in line for everything else, or other things than doing the rides.
Yeah.
So I think the idea that they've got such a huge customer base in such a small space will make it worthwhile for them to put a lot of development time into it.
Yeah, and everybody has a phone, right? So you don't have to buy a headset, it's just right there. And Magic Leap, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Magic Leap. They're based in Florida. They've got a ton, there's been a lot of hype about Magic Leap, and they recently, I guess around 6 months ago, released their first headset, and that's the spatial computing, where it's augmented reality mapped to your space. So you're wearing these goggles and you've got a computer strapped to your hip. But their goal is to augment the world, so everything will be augmented. There'll be augmented cities over the cities we live in now. It's kind of hard because their headset's $2,500, so it's not something that everybody's going to go out and buy. But, as these new glasses, I know Facebook is working on glasses. Google is probably going to, learn from their first iteration and release another set of glasses. But that's, I think, coming sooner rather than later.
Well, with that, I think we should thank Becky for a really fascinating overview of the landscape at IC Immersive and in education in general. Thank you very much, Becky.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it was super cool. I'm glad we recorded it. Thanks so much.
Great.